As the NBA moves closer and closer to the February 9th trade deadline, there are rumors and reports about that the Charlotte Hornets could potentially be sellers at that deadline. We'll talk about it all today on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
You are Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Again, you can catch us wherever you get your pods. That also includes YouTube. So if you're watching YouTube, you see Doug, you can catch his Substack on Every Hornets Boxscore at everyhornetsboxscore.com. I'm Walker Mail. You can catch me on the radio here in Charlotte, 92.7 FM, Wes and Walker from 12 to 3. Before we get started, I did want to address a YouTube comment, Doug. And someone, So when you go to, if you want to go to the single camera, I'm already bossing you around. We're just getting started on the show. But can you go to the single camera focused on me? So somebody, you see, I'm going to try to get my finger lined up. All right. So you see this plate right here. Somebody asked me, is that an Aladdin antique plate or some Aladdin plate that you just put next to the TV amidst all the sports stuff? No, I just wanted to address it. That was actually the Alonzo Mourning plate that appeared in an episode of Show and Tell on this podcast 2 years ago. And I just have it displayed next to a Muggsy Bogues bobblehead. So I just wanted to clear that. I don't have an Aladdin plate just chilling next to all this Hornets and sports stuff.
Well, it's an important conversation, and I'm glad we had it.
Yeah, 100%. It's what we're leading off with, and I just wanted to address that, so thank you very much. Now, let's talk a little bit more about the Hornets at the trade deadline, because Charania of The Athletic put out a report that the Hornets could be sellers once the deadline hits, again, February 9th. It's not anything that we're surprised about. We know the direction that the Hornets are going in, and it's not been pretty. But Terry Rozier was the name that was really singled out on the Shams report. Also, Plumlee, Oubre, McDaniels receiving interest. But this is something we've talked about quite a bit here, Doug, and I'm not surprised to see Shams put this out there.
No, I think I think this show was probably a few weeks ahead of the curve on this. I think now you're seeing
catch up.
Right, well, a little bit. I mean, I think you're seeing Scott Fowler, write columns about how it's time to shift to the youth movement. We'll talk about some of those interesting Clifford quotes in the second segment. I think, Rod Boone is coming to terms with the record. Steve Clifford is coming to terms with the record. You are seeing more young players playing more extended minutes now. So, yeah, I think this is all culminating in this idea that this record is not salvageable. This season is not salvageable any longer. Now we've come to terms with it. Now what's next? And what's next is good news that there are teams out there that are finding some of these players that the Hornets are willing to part with interesting. And there's also good news that really the Hornets are going to be one of the few teams that are going to be in sell mode because of the play-in, because of the parity that we're seeing across the league this season. There are a lot of teams that feel like they're 1, 2, 3 pieces away from getting into contention. So I think the Hornets are going to have a lot of suitors for Mason Plumlee, for Kelly Oubre, maybe not Kelly because he's injured, but maybe Jalen McDaniels, and it would be supreme if they could find somebody to take Terry Rozier.
Well, and I've been on this I've been on this for a while too. It's the fact that you do have so much parity. It's going the exact opposite direction the NBA feared it would go, right? So the NBA feared that everybody that was not in playoff contention was going to sell, and they were going to try to go after Wemby, and they sent out a memo at the beginning of the season. That's not even remotely happening. I mean, Adam Silver has to be honestly thrilled with the way this season has gone because of how talented the league is right now, with how talented the Eastern Conference is, which it's bananas. I mean, you're talking about Indiana being above 500 at the 8th spot, and the Toronto Raptors, they're 5-5 in their last 10 games. So 500 basketball is better than their overall season. So they're right there with Chicago. And It's funny because you have Washington with a little bit of a shot to get in the play-in, Toronto, and then, I mean, Orlando has the most outside of shots, and then Detroit and Charlotte just doesn't at all. So you're talking about two teams, and Orlando's not tanking on purpose. They're I mean, they've got all their young players out there, and they're trying to win as many games as they can with that young nucleus. So it is not going the direction the NBA feared, and Adam Silver has to be thrilled.
For sure. I mean, Houston and Detroit are the only two teams that are really blatantly tanking. Like, they're making roster adjustments such that you go, okay, they are not very interested in winning basketball games. Charlotte is accidentally tanking. People have been making that joke on our YouTube comments for the past several weeks, which is like, they don't need to really even make any moves to get worse. Like, they just happen to be worse because the moves that they've been making are, moving guys in and off the injury list. I mean, that's been the big contributor to why they haven't really been able to get into any kind of groove that would allow them to win some of these games, but they're competing. And, tonight the rubber really meets the road because they play Houston at Houston. That's going to be a really interesting game. Like, because Charlotte's been competing with these good teams. So it'll be interesting to see if that competition equals a win against a team that is legitimately bad and one of the only teams that can compete with them and how bad they've been offensively.
Yeah, I mean, there's 4 teams at the bottom tier right now, pretty clearly, and all of those teams have a point differential of at least -6 or worse, and it's Charlotte at -6.7, Detroit 7.4, San Antonio 8.7, Houston 7.9. Those are the worst 4 teams, and then everybody else, Orlando 3.8, everybody else within 2. So it goes to show how competitive the league is. And
I'm really hearing that it's only like San Antonio and Charlotte are going to be the only 2 teams that are interested in selling. Which could be interesting because, Jakob Poeltl is somebody that could possibly be on the trade block for San Antonio. Is that something that Charlotte gets engaged in and they do a little trade swapsies between 2 bad teams? Who knows?
Well, I mean, okay, but that would be hilarious if we're talking about 2 sellers and one selling to the other one. What looks more dysfunctional, the selling team that's buying or the selling team that's selling? It
would look dysfunctional if it was the only move, Walker. But I mean, I think if you're a Hornets fan, you gotta hope that Mitch is on the phone trying to make multiple moves. Now, as a longtime Hornets fan, I'll say I would just take one Mitch move. If Mitch does anything at the trade deadline,
correct,
I'll take it. But you really, really hope that they look at this not as an opportunity to get off one deal or to make, to acquire one piece or one trade or one draft asset, but they view this as like, hey, this whole thing that we tried is fundamentally broken and we need to reorganize everything, reset, and build again around LaMelo Ball. And so hopefully that means multiple moves, Mason Plumlee, Jalen McDaniels, hopefully Terry Rozier. And he's been part of these rumors as well.
Well, and so before we move on to the next segment, maybe talk a little more about Jalen McDaniels, who has a couple of trade rumors out there and has for the last week or so. Doug, I'll just ask you this to end it. How tradable is Terry Rozier right now?
I think very tradable, honestly, because, I know we have been paying attention closely to Terry's stats and he has not played up to the level that he has in the past couple of seasons, but we also understand the context of that, which is that he's been placed into this role not only as a primary ball handler when LaMelo was injured, but because they had injuries to Cody Martin and DSJ, he was also responsible for taking, the guarding position against some of the better guards that they faced early in the season. And so that was a lot of responsibility. It obviously affected his shooting because you can see over the past 5 or 6 games, his points per shot attempt has shot way up since LaMelo has gotten back and gotten into the groove and taken some of that responsibility off of him. There are multiple teams that are going to want more shooting. And there's one team out there in Los Angeles that just needs some shooting. And Toronto needs some shooting if they want to get back into this game. Or get back into this playoff race. So Terry has a very marketable skill, which is not only good shooter, but also like good shooter late. I mean, certified gamer. That's valuable. I think a team's going to bite on that. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's just the contract. I mean, we'll see. It's a big one.
Understanding that when we get to the deadline and there's going to be a team that says, man, and again, I think LA is the team because they're going to look at it and go, fine, we're going to, we LeBron James, we're not going to have him forever. We've got to, desperation makes people do silly things like take on a big contract. And I think a team's going to do it.
No, and the Lakers make sense. That the problem. So I guess if you're the Hornets, are you just willing to take one of those 2 first rounders? They can't get rid of both of their late first rounder. I mean, that would be all time desperate.
You are underestimating the purple and gold, my friend. They will do anything to touch that Larry O'Brien one more time.
With Terry. Gosh, yeah, I think you're right. I am underestimating their ability. Okay, coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Discuss Terry Rozier as a potential target for some of these teams that will be suitors at the trade deadline. What about Jalen McDaniels, where there's an actual player named that could be coming back in return for the Hornets? Would that trade make sense? We'll talk about it in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by RocketMoney, and if your New Year's goals are to manage your budget better and save money, you need RocketMoney. It's formerly known as Truebill, and it's a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions. It monitors your spending and helps you lower your bills all in one place. Over 80% of people have subscriptions they forgot about, like that streaming service you bought just to watch one show on, or that your free trial that you tried to use but never even really did. RocketMoney is going to take care of all of that. They'll quickly and easily identify all those subscriptions for you so you can stop paying for the ones that you do not want. So stop throwing your money away, cancel unwanted subscriptions, and manage your expenses the easy way by going to rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA. Jalen McDaniels coming up next.
This is Locked On Hornets.
I got a couple of rookies here. I got David spreading fake news.
Guess what? 4 championship games in a row. Continued success, sustainability.
I've got Steve Bob not plugging in his headphones.
Which I would love to see JaVale McGee, get out there on the ice velodrome or whatever you call those things.
This is a professional show we're trying to run here.
Only on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Doug, it's that time again. We're going fishing right before the trade deadline. Jake Fisher. Oh, yeah.
I got a big one.
There you go. Bring that one in. We'll fry it up and eat tonight, baby. Jalen McDaniels has been a part of a report by Jake Fisher that said, quote this, the Toronto Raptors have had shown interest in Hornets forward Jalen McDaniels, and they could look to move Gary Trent Jr. for a trade with Jalen McDaniels. So a former Duke Blue Devil. It's actually his birthday today. So a couple things that Gary's been in his sport. Yeah, big happy birthday shout to Gary Trent. He's turning 24 today. He also just got in a little scuffle, so to speak. I don't know what you would maybe a schism, a scuffle, not a brawl or a fight, but he got into something last night with Brooke Lopez after Brooke Lopez took off the headband and they got tied up towards the baseline.
Headband brouhaha.
Yeah, so brouhaha is probably a great one. So Gary Trent, happy birthday, and hope you're okay from the brouhaha. What do you think about this reported thing from Jake Fisher that, Raptors could be interested in Jalen McDaniels? And I think we've heard a couple of times that Toronto might be looking to move off of Gary Trent.
I wonder how much of this is, hey, who really likes long forwards, skinny long forwards? Who has a lot of those? Who really likes those? Oh, Toronto.
Oh, that roster's hilarious. Yeah.
So how much of it is like that fits their whole idea of what they're trying to build around, and how much of it is actual real interest? I'm not sure. Gary Trent Jr. is an interesting name, although that seems like, he seems like a Terry Rozier type of player. So, it's somebody that's going to shoot the ball really well, give you a lot offensively, not give you much defensively, does get a lot of steals and deflections, but in terms of a lockdown defender is not somebody that I would really want to pair next to LaMelo Ball. Like the ideal guard is somebody that doesn't need the ball a ton next to LaMelo and can take some more of the defensive responsibilities. So I don't know about Gary Trent Jr., but look, I think Jalen's going to get interest from multiple teams.
Sure. Well, yeah, and bringing in Gary Trent, you have to understand that I would imagine he opts into his player option. That's going to have him make $17-18 million next season. So after 1 year trading for him, then you would have to try to work out some contract extension if you wanted to keep him, but then he'll come off of the books. But in reality, I mean, Jalen is coming off of the books this year. You'd probably want to extend Jalen because he's not going to make $17 million next season. So you're going to be trading for a player, to me, that is less efficient. Gary's a better scorer, but the shooting percentages are about the same, even though Gary has much higher volume at 7 3-point attempts per game. But to me, I'd rather have Jalen. Shocker. But I think with the money, with the skill set, with the efficiency, not needing the ball, I mean, give me Jalen.
So, but I think it brings up a good point, which is that there are going to be competing objectives at this trade deadline and in the next offseason, which is the competing objectives are move off of old money. But I think also don't be afraid to take on new money if it means you get draft capital in return, like take on bad money. So I think those two things can sort of happen at the same time where you're getting off because, you're going to have Gordon Hayward's expiring contract coming up as a possible tool to use next offseason. So, I think there's going to be multiple things happening at the same time. Because look, the Hornets can't just focus on clearing their books completely. That wouldn't make any sense because they can't go out into free agency and wheel and deal like a lot of other teams can, despite Brian Windhorst saying that Charlotte is a city on the come up. I mean, I agree with that. I love the city of Charlotte, but I still don't think NBA players are like pining to come to Charlotte. Right. So, they can't just focus on completely clearing the books. There has to be some idea of like, okay, we can take a bad contract on if it means we get a first round pick, lottery protected first or whatever. That's the kind of deals they need to do.
Yeah, 100%. So, and you would think more so the veterans. Now, maybe we talk about this later, but I think it's interesting in the initial report we talked about from Shams that it's Terry Rozier. We've heard from McDaniels, a couple times, or heard about McDaniels a couple times. Plumlee, Oubre also in that report, but no PJ Washington. I think the fact that he's going to be due a pretty decent check and PJ is going to be on a rental if you trade for him. I think that's probably why he's not initially at the front of everybody's interest level. And Gordon Hayward, we know why there. I mean, this year you have one more year of $30 million, and then then it's expiring. That's the value for Gordon right now. So we'll see exactly how all of that unfolds as the season goes on. But Doug, if it goes this way and they sell Terry Rozier and they trade him for whatever, right? Maybe a pick with the Lakers, maybe some other young players. Steve Clifford was pretty receptive to this shift to youth in post-game questioning from media after this last contest against the Boston Celtics. So, Steve Clifford talked about that, and it was really Scott Fowler of the Charlotte Observer asking that question about that shift to youth. I'm trying to pull up the quotes right now. So
I got him if you want me to
go ahead. No, sure. Yeah, if you got him, go ahead. So here's what Steve had to say after that game.
They said, quote, "What the fans obviously don't see is that they, meaning the young players, have a chance every day. Like Tuesday at practice, they do play every day. They do play live. I do watch closely, and we do filming. I think there's sometimes this misconception that when guys are not playing minutes, they don't get a chance to be seen. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I've read articles where general managers will say you can't develop players without minutes played. I would totally disagree with that. I would say that player development is about minutes earned. So one thing that I do love about here is that Mitch is old school, and nobody is more old school than Michael. We don't have one guy on our roster that can complain right now about playing time. Not one, if you're truthful. They've all had a chance, okay? Some of them did a lot better than others, and those are the guys that are still getting a chance, unquote.
I mean, it's interesting to watch Steve too, because he's always going to tell you how he feels. It's what I loved about Steve being named the coach, right? Like it felt a little haphazard in the offseason, but Steve Clifford coming back from a media standpoint, I knew he was going to be fun to listen to after the games. I think he's right though, Doug. I mean, we talked about it with James Bouknight at the beginning of the season, man. I mean, even if they were fully healthy, I think Steve Clifford was going to give James Bouknight a chance all the time because of what he was talking about with such a talented first-round pick. Kai Jones, maybe if you really wanted to, you could have more of a problem with him not playing and working out some of those kinks. But, I mean, you weren't tanking at that time. You needed to try to win as much as you could because it wasn't full-on, hey, we just need to bottom out mode. What do you make of these comments?
I think it totally aligns with what we knew about Steve Clifford during his first stint here, which is that he is big into guys earning the playing time. And so that means that they may not play as soon as a lot of people would like to see them play, but that if they earn the playing time, they will eventually play. And this really all comes down to how much you as a fan trust Steve Clifford as a talent evaluator. And I would just say that a lot of teams and a lot of smart basketball people over the years have trusted Steve Clifford and put them on the bench. I mean, he was with Brooklyn just a year ago as somebody that was, part of their organization, part of evaluating talent there. So, and obviously Orlando trusted him. He's part of the Van Gundy tree. Like, a lot of smart basketball people have enlisted him to evaluate talent. And I can't think of too many guys that have come through Steve Clifford's system here in Charlotte and gone on to that he didn't play, that have gone on to like big, burst after. I mean, the one guy you could point to is Malik Monk, who's played really well in Sacramento, but he had to go through multiple stops, and sometimes that's what it takes for players. They've got to go through these multiple issues and almost get out of the league for them to sort of realize, hey, I was just looking at comments from Bull, who plays in Orlando right now, and he said, right, I had to learn that I had to work hard. It's like, okay, yeah, like you've got to, it doesn't stop when you get into the league. Like you've got to continue to work on skills. It's something that Clifford keeps pointing out, with Kevin Durant, that even though Kevin Durant has ascended to all this success, one thing that he saw from him in Brooklyn was that he's not satisfied. He comes in, what are we working on today? What am I going to do to get better? That kind of thing. So, and I think you're right, Walker. He did give Bouknight a chance. Now, yes, that chance came because of injury, but he got the chance and he didn't play well. And I haven't seen much in the way. And Bouknight has a big fan base, and they're an active fan base, and they like to comment. And I did not see a lot of comments saying, "Oh, well, Bouknight didn't get a fair chance," or "Bouknight actually played well." You don't know what you're talking about. Everyone could see that it wasn't working.
Oh yeah, well, no, and we go to James Bouknight more so because he's the first round pick that you drafted in the lottery that isn't getting a chance right now. And so maybe you want to say JT Thor's not getting all that much of a shot, but he kind of is, not a ton of minutes, but he is out there every once in a while. James Bouknight played 25 games, and that goes, I would have gone with the under on that, and I know not all of that is just James Bouknight coming in and playing 15, 20 minutes, right? But 25 games at this point, given how poorly he shot, I mean, man, 4.5 points in that 25 games. He shot 42% from 2-point range. He shot 25% from 3-point range on 2.5 attempts per contest. He shot under 70% from the free throw line. Just, it wasn't good. I don't want to pick on the guy, but I do think Steve Clifford gave James Bouknight a real shot. And here's one thing I'll say. If there's sellers and there's more opportunity for Bouknight, it's absolutely time to play him. If you're going to lose, you need to bring him back. And if he does that, Doug, then overall for Steve Clifford, I think he'll have managed what to do with the players on the court about as well as you could, right? Because if you have the goal to win at the beginning of the season, and you give Bouknight a little taste and it doesn't really work out. You give Kai Jones a taste. It doesn't work out. Now you have LaMelo coming back. Of course, you're going to play him. And he's playing 35 minutes a game, LaMelo is. So he's getting, right? There's no per 36-minute stats to go to. Just look at what he's doing in the normal game, right? Like you can see maybe the center rotation for sure. I had my problem with Mark, and I'm still going to have my problem with Mark Williams getting DNP CDs in place of Nick Richards. I'll be frustrated with that. But for the most part, I'll think for the guy that needed to come in and who wanted to win, and that was the team objective, and it's clear that at the trade deadline, at the halfway point, that's not going to happen. If they start to play Kai Jones more, JT Thor more, James Bouknight more, then honestly, I'll think he'll have handled the minutes divvy up situation pretty damn well with the direction that this franchise took this season.
Well, he knew he had to play Bouknight early in the season because of the injuries, and you saw Clifford form a relationship with Bouknight, restore that trust that was lost with the previous regime in Borrego. But I think Borrego looks a lot smarter today than he did at the beginning of the season, after we've seen what we've gotten from Bouknight and Kai Jones, because a lot of heat, even including the general manager who fired him, gave him a little bit of a heat on the way out for not playing those guys. And it's like, okay, well, that's two coaches now that have decided that these two guys aren't good enough to maintain positions in a rotation, in a beat up rotation. I mean, it's not that they're not getting playing time in a fully healthy rotation. It's that even injuries, you've seen Bryce McGowan's, who is, they called Bouknight up when Cody Martin got the knee soreness injury and was out. But yeah, he went to Bryce McGowan's, and that's where you go to the quote and you go, some of them did a lot better than others. Like that to me is the most interesting part of the quote, right? It's not that this is a sort of a marginal thing and it's a coin toss and I got to go, Bouknight or Bryce McGowan's, who do I go? Because that's what's happening, by the way, with Nick Richards and Mark Williams, I think. That's a coin toss. It's like, well, one guy gives me this, the other guy gives me that. Who do I go to here? That's a marginal call. It seems like from these quotes that the Bouknight and the Kai Jones situation are not marginal calls. They're well outside the rotation, and only multiple injuries or a big fire sale would result in them getting more playing time. But look, I just think it's a situation where Steve Clifford really values what he sees in practice. And I think that's tough for fans, rightly so, because look, I think what Steve Clifford, this is one point of contention I would have with these quotes, is that I think Steve Clifford and some of these coaches, they get real insidery about this stuff. And they're like, we know, we have this special information and we know. But this is a public facing thing. Like at some point you do have to play these guys and you do have to say, either show us the practice film, right? Which you're not going to do because you don't want to reveal that, or you have to play these guys and sometimes you have to sort of sacrifice these guys and say, all right, we're going to play them. And I got to show you that this guy, it doesn't have what it takes.
Well, yeah, and I want to continue that conversation, and you bring up Bryce McGowan's, who played the other night against the Boston Celtics early when it mattered. So coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
We'll discuss a little bit more of this shift to youth, the possible shift to youth, plus Steve Clifford's comments and Cody Martin, his status for this upcoming game against the Houston Rockets. This episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your #1 source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis, and you can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. If you love sports podcasts, hopefully you do. You can find those on BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and the easiest way to get your betting info. You can head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. More Hornets content coming up next.
Is Locked On Hornets.
Walker, sometimes you don't have to have the best package.
Okay.
Sometimes you just have to have the only package. If you wait, if my dating life taught me anything, sometimes you just have to wait around long enough until you're the only thing remaining. And then suddenly, you look pretty great in comparison.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
The last thing, Doug, I wanted to mention about Steve Clifford's comment, something that wasn't included there was, because that was a long answer. He even joked about it when Scott Fowler asked about, is there a time? And I think the way Scott Fowler worded the question was important too. He said, is there a time at this season where you don't necessarily emphasize winning games, and I'm paraphrasing, but where you don't necessarily care about the wins and losses as much as you care about the improvement and the developing of young players? And Steve Clifford, said yes. And then he went into this real long response about JJ Redick and how he improved in practice. And then when they called upon him in the postseason, JJ showed up. He talked about some of these guys, how they've had their agents told Steve Clifford, thank you, because of some of the players that didn't get playing time. It actually made them work harder, and it allowed them to know how it is to become a pro in this league. Mm-hmm. And so it was a real long answer, but Steve Clifford, clearly we know where he stands on this.
Well, this is a burr in his saddle. I think that's the right expression.
Oh yeah.
I think it's a burr in a saddle. I think that's right. And I think he's taken offense to this line of questioning before, that he doesn't play young players. He obviously thinks it's not the right question to ask. And so, I think he did a good job explaining, but I don't know that it's going to change a lot of minds. I mean, I think fans are pretty much in one camp or the other. Either they like Steve Clifford's philosophy, because it is old school. I think a lot of fans are going to hear that quote, though, about saying like Mitch is old school and Michael's old school, and go, hey, maybe a little new school, right? I mean, we've tried old school for a while. How's that working out for us? It's not working out real well. So maybe, this is I think there would be a lot of eyes rolled at that particular part of the statement, especially when you consider like they were thinking about D'Antoni or they were thinking about Atkinson, and then they had to roll back. I mean, there's nothing more old school than rolling back to the coach that used to coach your team. So I think people are going to not respond great to that part of the quote.
Well, and when Steve Clifford talks about practice and he says, look, I see them every day. I see them in 5-on-5. And I'm telling you, with the playing time, who's earned that playing time. I actually, I don't think that all of these guys need the time out there on the court. But I will say that, Marty Herney used to say this all the time when judging quarterbacks, that you can only really evaluate them when the lights are on. And so I wonder if that also rings true to players when you're in a stadium with more pressure because it's a game that matters, with all the people in the stands in that big arena rather than the practice court that's, right to the side where they lower the blind so you can't watch practice, right? I mean, I wonder if when the lights are on, does that ring true for NFL quarterbacks like it does for NBA players?
Yeah, so to me, I take that philosophy to mean like if a player plays really well in practice, you got to see him under the lights to really make a judgment. Whereas I see Clifford here sort of insinuating that behind the scenes, they're not playing well. And Steve Clifford doesn't believe that like putting them under the bright lights is going to magically make them better. Correct. And even if it did, I think he fundamentally believes that you should be able to do it every single day and not just wait until your number is called. I think he loves players that show up every day, even if they know they're not going to be able to play. And, I'm not going to extrapolate that means he feels that way about Book Knight or Kai Jones, but I don't think one would be like totally unfair to make that leap at this point because we're not seeing those guys.
Right. No, and I would agree with that. So Bryce McGowens, maybe he is playing really well in practice, well enough to get some minutes. He had 13 minutes in this last game against Boston. Didn't score, really didn't put up any much of a box score here. 0 of 1 on the only field goal attempt that he took. It's the last significant run that he got since Philadelphia on December 11th. So we're talking about a month in between significant runs where you put Philadelphia 23 minutes, New York on December 9th, 30 minutes, at Brooklyn 20 minutes, right? So we saw that stretch before he got his chance. Now gets a little taste of action against Boston. What did you make of McGowan's appearance?
I really loved this appearance from McGowan's because you mentioned the length of time, and yet here he gets his number called. He's ready. I thought his play was fundamentally sound. Even when you look back to that stretch where he was getting more playing time in Charlotte, they weren't passing him the ball a ton. Because I think the team understands that Bryce knows how to score and that he's going to have no problem translating that to like once he does become a regular part of the rotation. I don't think he's going to have any problem taking 7 to 10 shots and knocking down a few of them. Okay. I don't think there's a question about that, especially after what we saw in Summer League. The question is, can he do the other things? And I think this game illustrated that he can. I mean, I saw several, I noted them down in my Every Hornets box score rundown. Like there were several moments where he made the right defensive play. He was in the right position. And I think that's what the team is looking for. I think that's what he's been working on. And it showed in this game. And so this to me was a game that showed that Bryce McGowan's can be trusted. And that's step one. The trust is step one. And then step two is, okay, now you're in the rotation. Now you get more responsibility. And so hopefully we see that if they do shift to a youth movement, get him a few more shots.
Well, and that's because of the starters not trusting him right off of the bench. I know we talked about that.
Starters don't trust anybody. It's not about Bryce, right? I mean, this bench, and that's what's crazy about Book Knight not getting any playing time. Because what's the one thing the bench can't do right now? Score. What's the one thing that Book Knight is supposed to be able to do? Score. And Book Knight can't get on the floor.
Well, and Cody Martin is out right now, or he was in this last game, and he's doubtful for this game against Houston. Steve Clifford talked about that afterwards against Boston, and he said that Cody's sore, and sometimes that happens when guys get back from injuries, and he was sore coming back. And so he was actually a little sore in the previous game against Boston, the first go-around, played, and then they decided to just be real careful with him. That's what Steve Clifford said. So we'll see if he suits up tonight.
Look, this has been brutal. I got to say, this has been brutal, right? right. I mean, this is Cody Martin is the only move you made in the offseason. Yeah, you were supposed to make this other big move for Miles Bridges. Well documented why that didn't happen. May still happen yet, but this is the only official move that you made in the offseason. And it looked like, I don't know why the injuries piled up on him early in the season, if it was a conditioning thing. I don't know what was going on, but, essentially wasn't ready to go, and then misses a ton of time. And then now getting back because, you are ramping back up into that NBA speed. Now here we go. Another, knee soreness issue that's keeping you out multiple games. Hopefully there is a resetting in the offseason, and then coming into next season, he is just like, because this to me, the contract was 4 years? Really is 3 years, because this was a wasted year.
Oh, yeah. Now, I mean, it clearly is. And maybe we can create, but before we end the show today, maybe we do this later on in the week and just form another version of Stangin' or Clangin', because that is the title for all of our games these days. But Bryce McGowan's got me thinking about this. The not debate, but the hot button issue for you, calling Jalen McDaniels untradeable, right? That you couldn't trade him. And of course, it's clearly only LaMelo. But here's my question: how protective are you over Bryce? Because clearly he's not untradeable. Nobody is outside of LaMelo. But I think it's okay to say, yeah, I'd really rather not include Bryce McGowan's in any trade. So just, is there any way to articulate that right now without knowing what a potential trade could be? Is that just how you leave it? I'd rather not, but if it's going to be the sweetener on making this deal, I think is important, we'll go ahead and do it. Just how protective are you going to be over Bryce?
Well, it's the same kind of idea that I mentioned with Jalen. It's not that Jalen or Bryce are untradeable. It's that the value needs to exceed what you would
Correct.
Normally think that player would get, right? You just need 100%. To be more picky. And so for Bryce, yeah, like if you're talking, Bryce, because you got to view Bryce, who was selected early second round, and those guys typically get, late first round type of contracts. And I think they view him, they moved up to get him. So I think they view him as a first round prospect that slid into the early second round, and that they went and gobbled up. So if he's going to be moved, then you need, to get in return a serious veteran talent. And again, it's part of a package. I'm not talking about straight up 1-for-1 trade. Bryce McGowan's 4-player X. I'm talking about a package that would include a serious veteran that, could make a big impact for them next season, or, a great draft package that includes first rounders. That's all. Like, Bryce can't go for another second rounder. That wouldn't make any, or multiple second rounders. That wouldn't make any sense.
Well, and also, I think Bryce McGowan's is the only pick that I can remember that was a guy before the draft or leading up to the draft that draft Twitter loved, right? Like, how the Grizzlies are just compiled with NBA draft Twitter darlings, Jaren Jackson, then Desmond Bane, then Xavier Tillman, Brandon Clark. I mean, the Grizzlies are run by Twitter. The Hornets have the one pick, and that's McGowan's. And so I'd rather not. That's just the best way I can put it on McGowan's. I'd rather not trade.
I would rather not as well. If you're going to trade a player that has some serious future prospects for this team, it better address one of the I would say 2 or 3 fundamental issues that this team has. It has to address that, and it has to address it definitively. We're talking about defense up top. We're talking about defense down low. We're talking about, still deficiencies that they have. Mark Williams is going to be on the come up, but it's going to take multiple years for that to pan out. So if you're looking to contend more immediately, then you still have to address the center position. It has to address one of these big issues that they have, or I'm not going to like it. And they're just going to have to deal with that. They're going to have to deal with me not liking it. I'm going to come on this show. And I'm going to say that deal was clanging.
Well, I mean, what's fantastic about this, all of it, Doug, is that you have both of your hands on your hips right now. Like you had.
Well, standing is getting exhausting a little bit. It's man.
Yeah, you had one hand on your hip. You were pointing at the camera like this and looking straight into it. You were scalding the Charlotte Hornets. That's what you were doing. You were chastising them for future things that have not happened yet. But now they're shaking in their boots. They don't want to piss off Doug Branson, and I don't want to either, to be honest with you.
I'm too dangerous. I'm too dangerous for radio. I have to cut. That's my role on the show. You are the responsible radio journalist. I have to come on here and be the firebrand and hold this team's feet to the fire. Because who else is going to do it? Honestly, who else is going to come on here and hold their feet to the fire? Somebody's got to do it, because I'm tired of mediocrity. I'm tired of irrelevancy. I want to see these Carpenter bees, get some stingers and get some stangers and finally go out there and compete for the playoffs. I'm tired of it.
All right. Thanks for making Locked On Hornets your first listen today. Make your second listen game-to-game NBA every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game-to-Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. Have a great rest of your day. We'll be back with you tomorrow.